important, and you just
Mm,
break it all down in the book. Uh, and in the chapter you titled Protection, I love this chapter, and I learned something brand new that I'd never heard of before that I really appreciated. You discussed the Lancaster Black Self-Protection Society that I hadn't
yes.
heard of and was really inspiring. You highlight the essential role that Black women played in organizing and leading efforts to protect their communities. Um, and I've been studying more and more the role of Black women in both armed self-defense and all kinds of uh, areas, but I hadn't come across this story before, so it was
Yeah.
great. And this was just fascinating history that was kept from me in my schooling, and I was hoping you could talk more about the Lancaster Black Self-Protection Society and how you see the
Yeah.
broader historical role of Black women in armed resistance.
First, I love the word that they're using the word black in the 19th century. The Black
Yeah.
Self-Protection Society is just like amazing. This story is one of my favorite stories to tell. It's actually a story I also talk about in my first book, Force and Freedom too. Um, where basically I'm gonna try to keep it short because I don't want to have too many long answers. But like, basically, William and Eliza Parker are Black. They are fugitives. They are living in Christiana, Pennsylvania, which is right on the border of Maryland, the slave state of Maryland and the free state of Pennsylvania. And they make their house sort of like a depot on the Underground Railroad, a stop where if you need to get supplies to keep going further north, they will protect you, they will hide you, they will do whatever they can, even at the risk of their own lives. Like that was part of the mantra of their group, that we will protect fugitive slaves even at the risk of our own lives. And so they had this reputation that if you got to their home, you could be protected, and everyone in that community would work to protect you. And so enslaved men escape Maryland, and they wind up going to Christiana. They go straight to the Parker's home, where William and Harriet Parker basically say, "Come on in. We'll hide you in the attic, and we'll help you get further north." Well, because of the Parker's reputation, it's a matter of hours before the enslaver, Edward Gorsuch, his son, his nephew, a U.S. Marshal, I think maybe one other person, show up at the Parker's home and basically bam on the door and say, like, "We know you've got our enslaved property. We want them back." I'm paraphrasing a lot of this, but but that's essentially what happens. And then William Parker comes to the door and he's like, "Over my dead body. That's not happening. You're not getting these men back." And then Eliza goes up to the roof and basically is like, "Babe, you want me to sound the alarm? I will sound the alarm." And she starts blowing this horn for the Lancaster Black Self Protection Society, the horn that would alert everybody that, like, danger is here. Come to our house, meet us, help us out. The men who are outside start shooting at the window. Thankfully, they live in a stone house. So she's hiding under the window, but still blowing the horn while hiding under the window. Within minutes, 80 men and women, white and black, show up with rifles, pistols, pitchforks, farm equipment, like ready to protect these four enslaved men. And it's just crazy because like Eliza's brother-in-law is panicking. He's like, "No, just give them up, give them up." And Eliza is like, she picks up a corn cutter, which is like a machete. And she basically says, "I will chop off the first member of our group that tries, I will chop off the head of the first member of our group that tries to give these people up." Like, this machete is not just for enslavers. This machete is for snitches, right? Like, snitches get stitches. Like, like that's what she says. And okay, so long story short, all of a sudden, shots are fired. We don't know who fires the first shot. An altercation ensues. Edward Gorsuch is laying on the ground dying. His son gets shot and takes off. The nephew and the U.S. Marshal, they see they're outnumbered. They take off. It's wild. It's wild. And what's crazy is that William Parker writes about this in his narrative, and he says Edward Gorsuch lay on the ground dying, and then he says, and the women put an end to him. The women put an end to him. And I was like, oh, like, as I'm in the archive, like reading these things, I'm like, what? Like, did they slit his throat? Did they snuff him out? Like, what did they do? I don't know. But all I know is that this tells me a lot of things, that women were very much engaged in violent resistance, that women were not timid and unafraid. They were not the damsel in distress. They were the ones that were sounding the alarm, picking up corn cutters, and ready to take out the master as he lay on the ground dying. And so it's just, for me, this story is like the pinnacle of protection. You know, they don't know these four enslaved men, but they help them anyways, and they manage to escape. They get all the way to Rochester, New York. They stay in Frederick Douglass's home. Frederick Douglass writes about this in his narrative. He's like, yeah, I saw these men, I saw William Parker, and I helped them get on a boat to Canada. And as they're getting on a boat, William Parker's like, "Hey, Freddie Doug, I got a gift for you. I want to give you a token, a memento of the Battle of Christiana." And he gives him the pistol that fell out of Edward Gorsuch's hand. And it's like, dang, like it just, to me, that whole thing. I mean, the abolitionists were gangster. They were gangster. And like they knew what they were up against was life or death. And I love
Hmm.
that story. I'm sorry,
Uh,
that took too long, but like if it
I
makes you want to
love
read the
that
book,
story. Love that
there's more
story.
to it. There's more that happens. There's plot twists, but yeah, it's a lot.
Everyone's got to read the book and get that story. I told you I was down in Mississippi last June, and I got to interview someone that knew my enslaved great grandmother, and she talked about surviving during Jim Crow. They burnt down the daycare center in their town, trying to drive everyone out of the town, all the black people out of the town,
Mm.
and they armed themselves, resisted, fought back, and were able. They reopened the daycare center in a tent, but
Wow.
they didn't end it, and it just that story just made me think of
They
how much
refused.
they
They
were.
refused.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes. Ooh, this is so powerful. I don't know about everybody else, but I was on the edge of my seat for that story. I was sat for that story. And as we're talking about force, as we're talking about this refusal through resistance and protection of community of self, in your book, you state that Black people have always used force, not to
Mhm,
oppress, but to protect, defend, and liberate themselves. So, how do you
mhm,
see this distinction between using force for liberation versus oppression? And how does that
mm.
play out in both historical and contemporary resistance movements?
Yeah, another good question. Force and the way I define it is really